I'd like to now introduce John Sharp, who many of you know and have come to listen to learn more tonight. But before I turn it over to John, I'd like to just share a little bit more about him. And as we've gotten to know John and Michelle over the last number of months, it's been an absolute blessing. They've been patiently teaching the newbies, Diane and I, about the business, and their expertise has just been overwhelming. And so we're very thankful to John and his expertise and what he brings to our clients in this business. So about John, he's recently retired historian who taught at Heston College in Kansas. He's a former director of the Mennonite Church USA Historical Committee and Archives. John holds an MDiv from Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary and has 15 years of experience as a pastor. John has been an instructor of Rhodes Scholar courses on Amish life and culture and a frequent presenter for lifelong learning programs. John has published five and soon to be six books coming out this year, and he has led many tours, numerous tours with Tour Imagination, heritage tours to Western Europe, Prague and Poland, and Central Asia that we're going to hear about more tonight. John is married to Michelle Miller Sharp, and they have three children and four grandchildren. John, over to you to take it over from here and carry it on.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you into this conversation. I hope all of you will feel free to contribute, even if you're not on the panel. We have three distinguished guests on the panel, which I will introduce in a bit. But let me do a quick overview of this tour, which I think is the most exotic tour that we do. Through the Desert Goes Our Journey is a song that they sang again and again and again, as they did indeed cross deserts. Here's a quote from Martin Clausen, Elizabeth's ancestor, who notes the need to hire camels to carry extra feed and eventually themselves. So the story is that 5 wagon trains went eastward after 18,000 Mennonites migrated westward to North America in the 1870s. They said, no, that's the wrong way. We need to go east. And I can explain more about that eventually. But in any case, some 900, about 930 people, individuals, joined this trek. That number keeps growing because Irene Plett, our primary researcher, keeps discovering new sources, many of them German, which she translates. So from 5 different places, Mennonites journeyed eastward in wagon trains. And in the next slide, you'll see the country that they're going into. You see China there most prominently. And you see the red circle around Tashkent. That was their primary goal. And then from there, they divided, with half going north into, east into Kyrgyzstan, and the others going southwest, ending up at Khiva. Okay, let's go on. Here are the numbers. And Irene Plett is the one who keeps adding numbers. And so we have about 930 people, 135 families, and over 200 wagons. And you see the miles they traveled, 1,700, 2,400, 2,450. This is in the deserts and over mountains with wagon trains, with the horses. And of course, they have to have water and feed for all the horses. So it was quite the deal. And so these began in 1880 and they ended in December of 1881. Let's go on. I would see so many um, exotic buildings, places, architecture. Go on. Children thrive here. Go on. And more dried fruits and nuts that you could imagine. Again. Aha. This is the most used photo, I think, from this tour. There's Audrey, who's just received a gift of uh, naan, the flat bread, which is made there. Go on. We receive amazing hospitality. This was our welcome to Zira Bulak in 23. Go on. Amazing hospitality. We were fed and dined and celebrated, and it was an amazing experience. This place where 144 years ago, ancestors arrived and spent the winter, and the locals shared their mosque with them. And they are remembered fondly today. On. Khiva and Akhmechit are the main targets of our conversation tonight. Go on. Amazing places, architecture. Everywhere you turn, especially in the city of Khiva, you turn the corner and there is yet something else to take a picture of. Go on. It's also the place of math, algebra, and science. And here is a native son who is the father of algebra. While our ancestors were mucking around in the dirt in Europe, these scientists were making new discoveries. What? So here's the Khan who invited Mennonites to inhabit his spaces. He had a design for this. He wanted them to introduce new products, modernize in a sense. And this shows a new hall, a summer hall that he had built. And he wanted a parquet floor laid and asked Mennonites whether they could do that. So after that, Mennonites built all kinds of things for him. All right. Forward.
These from summer
He
tent.
brought
Right now,
some.
the Saskatoon photo.
He brought some 39 families from Lausanne, which was a disastrous experience. And that's where about 40 families said, enough, we're going home. Actually came to North America. So the Khan invited Mennonites to inhabit this garden owned by his brother. And so here is typically what we see when we arrive. And this man, a local, is showing us a live pear on the tree we thought was dead on the last trip. It is now gone. Go on. And this is really quite an amazing development that we have discovered. Those from the colonies were seeking to escape the world and the Antichrist who lived in the West. And they became modernizing agents in Central Asia, introducing new agricultural crops, new breeds of livestock, new implements, and on and on. When those of you who were on the 2007 exploratory tour with Jim Yunke and Sharon Eicher, Jim, I remember you saying, you asked Mr. Karimov, who was the director of museums, why they would have a display for Mennonites. Well, he said, they introduced so many things here. We credit them with our farm products. And when we're there, every day we eat products that Mennonites introduced. Go on. Here's our group. Some of you are on tonight who are in this picture. This is the museum in the city of Khiva, a museum that highlights the work and products of Mennonites who lived in the village Akhmechet nearby. Go on. Here's the inside of that museum. products from Akmachet. And they credit Mennonites for what they brought. Go on. Things are changing. You saw the open field with the pear tree just a bit ago. This time when we got there, things were developing. There are attempts to recreate this village, add tourist destination, hotels, museums, restaurants. It's amazing. At first, I wondered about the commercialization of this Mennonite story, but then I thought, look, the only thing there is to see there is an old well. These guys want to tell the story. Next. Haha, here we are. There's Rick. Here's the man who is heading up the restoration of Akmachet and making it a tourist destination. And he tells the story well because he extols the harmony between the two cultures and the two faiths. And that is the best story to tell. So I'm pleased that they will tell this story. Mennonites, villagers rather, who lived locally, know the story. Their grandparents and parents told them the story. And so they appreciate what's now going on. Next. Here are the panelists. To the left is Karen Schmidt. Bottom in the middle is Elizabeth Stauffer. And top right, we have Harold Fast. Okay, let's begin with our panelists. Elizabeth, you have lived with this story longer than any of the rest of us. Tell us who's with you and about your family experience.
Elizabeth, we just need you to unmute.
Do I start over again?
Yep. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, I'm the person in the blue on your picture, and with me is my sister Irene Jansen and my cousin Menno Clausen. All of us are great grandchildren of Martin Clausen, and actually also great grandchildren of Jacob Taves. That's both of my paternal grandparents traveled on that trek. So.
And Elizabeth, tell us how you learned this story.
Well, I've known that story all my life. As a young child, we had a wooden trunk in the basement, and the legend was that trunk had traveled on the back of a camel. And of course, for a young child, that's really exotic stuff. We also had hanging on the wall in my dad's study a large map. And we knew as kids, we knew that was a map of the Asienreise. It was a hand-drawn map with a description on the side. And that map is actually at the archives in Winnipeg now. So I didn't know much about the story as a young child, but always knew there was something really exciting and exotic about that. Do you want me to go on about?
Let's introduce the others.
Okay.
Harold Fast is visible, wearing something that I think he got in Central Asia.
Yes, thanks, John. Yes, I've got my Japan and coal pot that was gifted to me when we were in Sarabulak, and I certainly echo your comment, John, about us having a tremendous welcome in Sarabulak by the local mayor. And when he found that I had connections in the sense that my grandfather's uncle was one of the trekkers, Gerhard and Catherine Fast, and then he brought out my Japan and pol pot, and thanks for the opportunity to wear it tonight.
Yeah, it was a big celebration, and this was a big deal to our host, Sunat. He made you a celebrity that day.
Yeah.
Okay, and your grandfather's uncle is buried there, is he not?
Yeah, on the just before they got to Sarabulak, they were on some land that wasn't they did not have permission for, and I think it was the same day that Martin Clausen died. Their infant daughter also died, and they didn't have they weren't allowed to bury her, so the baby went with them until till the next time they stopped. And then later they got to Sarah Bulak and yeah, were welcomed very much. And I'll just point out that the relationship we've got with our host Sunat in Sarah Bulak is continuing. And as recent as yesterday, he sent me several pictures of putting a dome on their on the mosque that was under construction there, and also a picture of Ramadan gifts. And I had our friend Farron Geese, who's from Samarkand, but now in Saskatoon. And Farron Geese explained the significance of those gifts. It was kind of neat.
Very cool. Let's go to Karen. Karen, you were on a very special tour, the exploratory tour of 2007 with Jim Younkie and Sharon Eicher. Tell us a bit about that, and then tell us who you're connected to.
Karen, we just need you to unmute and to start your camera. Let's keep going. Karen seems to be having trouble, so let's keep going with the other two.
Okay. When did you begin researching the story? That began early with you, Elizabeth, not so early with Harold.
Yeah, I think it began, my family has always been interested in family story. And so we have a rich collection of diaries and memoirs. And one of them is a memoir. Well, we have Martin Clausen's diary that he kept from the trip until he died near Sarabulak.
Tell us a bit about Martin Clausen.
Pardon? Martin Clausen, yes.
A bit, yeah.
And then also a small book of memoirs that my grandfather, Jacob Clausen, wrote based on his father's. So the translation, they were written in German, so the translation of those diaries opened up the story, began to open up the story. Of course, there were parts they didn't talk about, like in my grandpa's memoir, he does not talk about Klaus Epp or the Second Coming stuff at all. He talks about them wanting to go to a place where they would again have military exemption.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I learned more of the story as I read other things. I read Fred Belk's book, The Great Trek, and that presented a different picture, more information. Franz Bartsch's book, Trek to Central Asia, and then later Walter Ratliff. So that, and plus articles that were published now, over time, have just continue to open up the story for me. I might mention that my ancestors did not go all the way to Akhmedchet. They were among the group that left from Lausanne, left to go to North America. Yep. So the Akhmedchet story is not part of my family story.
But up until then. And you make a very good point about the reason for this migration. Primarily to avoid military conscription, which is why the 18,000 Mennonites came to North America in the 1870s. There's Karen.
There she is.
Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, tell us a bit about your connections and your story. Beginning with family. When did you first become aware of the story?
Well,
I think we're frozen.
I had two great, I was a teenager.
I kept asking my parents, what's wrong in this community? I don't understand the background here. I don't understand what's going on and why we have some of the behaviors that we have. And I kept asking and kept asking. And finally, my father, when I was a teenager, he gave me the rudiments of the story of the Great Trek. And I'm going, oh, I also understood that it was taboo to talk about it within the community. I could talk about it with them, but not within the community. I never had a conversation as a young person with cousins or other families that might have been on the Great Trek who were in my community. And it wasn't until I was an adult and then Fred Belk's book came out. So that became a Christmas present to myself and my siblings from my parents. And then I started hearing a little bit more about it. And then, of course, way back in 2007, Jim Youngke and Sharon Eicher developed a tour. I was on that. And we discovered lots of things. And of course, I wanted to go back. And I did so with you.
And you did, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
That's fantastic. So it's been a major discovery, a story that keeps going for you.
And I no longer consider it taboo. Not that I ever did, but now I am able to talk about it freely and with pride.
Why was it taboo?
Well, part of why they went, yes, the conscription problem certainly was there. But the taboo part was they were going for the second coming. And
your ancestor was a major personality in that part of the story.
Of course, a lot of Mennonites and a lot of German people. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I wasn't sure what you said. You made a comment.
Oh, I just said, why was it taboo? Why was the story taboo in your community?
Because we're not to go looking for the second coming. We're waiting, but we're not to go looking for the second coming. And that's what happened. Some people, or most of the people, were very interested in the second coming. So besides the fact that they were going there for political reasons, trying to get away from militarism, et cetera, they were going to find the place where the second coming would happen. And of course, that wasn't happening, and things got worse and worse and worse. And a gentleman by the name of Klaus Epp was blamed for that in a major way in this country. Although Jim Youngke has had a lot to say about that in recent years, thankfully. And I believe that that was the major reason it was taboo. You just don't do that. So it was not talked about publicly. In fact,
you discovered on that 07 tour a much bigger and wider story and better story.
I think Karen's frozen on us, so maybe keep going and.
And many parts of the story are emerging. And every time we go, we discover new evidence, new things, new stories. This last time was major.
It was such taboo in the community. Can you hear me?
Yep. Now frozen again.
Karen, maybe what we'll get you to do is stop your video.
Are we back?
Yeah, stop the video, then we'll be able to hear your sound.
Okay, okay.
So my comment was the story has grown and grown. And the last time we were there, we discovered new stories, we discovered new projects. Machet is to be made into a tourist destination. And local people are owning the story. And a woman contacted me out of the blue because she saw I was doing these tours and gave me an archive full of photographs of that era. The Khan and his staff and her ancestors, plural, for 7 generations, were right-hand secretaries, poets, counselors to the Khans. So we're hearing that story from the other side that we never had before. So it's just amazing. Harold referred to a dome being placed on a mosque. Tell us about that.
Yeah, while we were there in Surabulak, our host took us to what was I think colloquially known as the Blue Mosque in our writings, and they're rebuilding a mosque. And no, we've had a fair amount of continuing communication with the Sunatan family, particularly with Ferengiz in Saskatoon. She's in regular contact with them, so it's a nice connection. Another
And
connection.
Why is there a new mosque?
It's been there for a long time. I'm not quite sure. I remember why they're building a new one.
Okay. Well, maybe I can answer the question then. Sunat said, the community is growing and there isn't room for everybody in the little mosque. Besides, people come on pilgrimages for the healing waters of the Sufi who lived in that place. So it's a tourist destination for other reasons other than the Mennonite story. And it's huge. Compared to the old mosque, it's huge.
John, can I just take a minute, please, and just compliment Diane and Richard for buying Tour Imagination. This was the 3rd trip that we've been on. We've enjoyed each of them very much. The first was in 08 to Poland. And then we've been there twice more since then. 2011 was in Ukraine. That was great. And now, since in September 23 was Uzbekistan, and we've gotten some pretty good connections there as well, including a family from Tashkent now working in our company here. Anyway, that's off your topic, John. Sorry.
Hey, that's part of the story.
But compliments to Diane and Richard.
Indeed, indeed. So many important stories here, and when you're on location, the stories give a new sense of place and meaning to the stories. And there's just nothing like seeing the place where it happened. Elizabeth, I also have pictures of you and your sister and cousin by a big mound of earth. What was that about?
I need to see.
Okay,
that was at the Rock Gate when we were traveling down from Tashkent to Samarkand. And this is a location that is described in some of the diaries. And so we stopped there.
And the location for what?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. You should have asked. You had to brush up on that.
It was a village of Ebenezer, which didn't last long. But Martin died at this place.
Oh, okay. No, we're thinking of 2 different places here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about where we had the ceremony for.
Okay,
Martin
that was just south of Surabulak.
Mm-hmm.
We, I pestered John a little bit because we had enough clues as to where this Ebenezer might have been. So I said, can we at least drive in that direction? And because that's where my great-grandfather, Martin Clausen, died. And so we did. And do you want me to tell the whole story there?
Yes.
Yeah. We drove for a while down kind of a dirt trail, and finally the bus driver said, I can't go any farther because I won't be able to turn around. So John said, okay, well, let's just stop here and we'll have a little bit of a memorial service. And there were a couple of mounds of dirt there, and my cousin Menno made a cross from some sticks, and we did a little bit of a ceremony. And while we were doing that, a Jeep with a couple of men drove up and talked to Marina, our tour guide. And then they zipped off again. And then after they left, Marina came to us and said, these guys told her that these mounds were some old German graves. So was one of them Martin Clausen's grave? Who knows? But it could be. That was one of the very special moments.
Yeah, that was very special.
Yeah.
So we relive old moments and recreate new ones, as in this case.
Yeah.
Karen, anything more to add before we go to Q&A?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. Do you have a question?
Reflecting back on your tours, 2 of them, what are your feelings?
Oh my, the first one, I found facilities, etc., to be so much more primitive. When I came back 10 years later, most of the roads were better, except for the one through the desert. That was a very poor highway.
It's
But
better
it had
now.
been new. It was new the first time that I was on a bus driving through the desert. Smooth, no potholes. Lots of restrooms.
Where?
Along the road. The first time there was no restroom, no public facility in the desert. So men went to the right and women went to the left. Which that was okay. I'd experienced that in Africa, so it wasn't such a big deal. But it was much nicer the second time, or much more comfortable. That was certainly one observation. The buildings, the architecture, as always, was just gorgeous. In fact, we had one person on the tour, John, with us. She was an architect by profession, and one of her major reasons was coming to see the mosques and the madrasas for their sheer beauty. And she preferred them to a European architecture, or so she said. So there's a lot of beauty to be seen.
Yeah. And foods to experience?
Oh, yes. And history. Driving through the mountainous pass. I don't remember the name of that area, but this time, the last time with you, John, we got a lot of history, military history about different warring factions meeting there in that valley. We're driving down beside the mountain, and to our right, there's a river. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do.
It was a pretty hostile place to live, I'm afraid.
Much of it was.
Hundreds of years ago.
Yes. But now, under a new president, things have opened up. The museum was ready to open in 2009. And when I arrived with my group for the opening ceremony, it was locked and it could not be opened.
Yes.
And the director of museum said, we'll have to have a change of government. Sure enough, a new president made all the difference. He is welcoming people. He wants people to know how well Uzbeks have treated minorities, and has given grants for telling the story, for refurbishing buildings. So it's a wide open story, wide open country now.
And the museum is just wonderful. They've done a beautiful job with that museum, collecting all those artifacts, setting it up. and graciously showing us around. They're very proud of it, and they should be.
And I think, did some of you help buy some of the artifacts they wanted to buy back for the museum? Harold, you were involved in that, I think.
Yes, yeah, they were needing some help putting stuff together, so we offered some help. We sent some help. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
John,
Well,
I know,
shall we go ahead?
sorry, John, it's Richard here. I know you were, I think, going towards questions in a minute here, and we want to open it up to some questions on the chat here. And is it okay to ask a question of you?
Yep, sure.
One of the questions in the chat was, do you know if there's any Mennonites that remain in the area?
No, there are no Mennonites who remain. The Akhmachet community broke up in 1935 when they were all deported under Stalin. And there's been no Mennonite presence there since.
Yeah, so that happened in 1935 when they were forced out, right?
Right. Now, the story in Kyrgyzstan is different than that. They also mostly all left. Some married locals and therefore are still there. Their descendants are still there, but not so in Akhmachet.
A question from the audience here. You mentioned that the Khan invited the Mennonites to build something, but they couldn't quite catch what you said about what was built. That was in your slides earlier.
Okay. Well, he wanted improvements, and Mennonites knew how to make that happen. They imported animals, new livestock, plants. Also, the first electric plant, Mennonites imported from Germany and installed. And Mennonites were involved in building, a parquet floor in his summer palace.
Yeah, that was what just came in the chat. Yeah.
He wanted them to do that. He had seen it in St. Petersburg, and he said, well, can you make something like this? Oh, they did, and it's still there.
Folks, other questions for John, please feel free to post them in the chat. We've got a minute here for some questions, and then we can.
And others of you who were on the tour, feel
Yeah,
free to
please.
chime in.
There's a question around what, knowing more about the second coming and what exactly happened. I'd like to know more
Karen,
about.
do you or do I tell that story?
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, there was a prediction of a date and time. And the prophet was dressed in white, sitting on a table on the outside of the house, and everyone was gathered around expecting the Lord to return. Didn't happen. So there was a new date predicted. It was 1889 and now in 1893. Didn't happen again, of course. So that was the expectations, and those expectations were just so strong.
John, a question about the church that the locals called the White Mosque. Is it still standing in Akhmachet?
No. It was their church house. The Mennonites built this church house and a schoolhouse nearby, next to each other, and they whitewashed it, both buildings. And so locals called it the White Mosque, the White Church. So that's where the title comes from. So the only thing that's left there is the old well, except for the new things that are now being refurbished and rebuilt.
Yeah. John, a question from Susan. She asks you, what's your interested connection to this story since your family wasn't directly involved?
Well, two things to say. One is I was asked that question a long time ago, I think on the 2008 tour. Said, this isn't your story. I said, it's part of my spiritual heritage. Whether my biological links are there or not, when I join a church, I accept its history and its stories. And when the first group came back from the 2007 tour, I think there were 4 or 5 presentations on that story. I was so curious. I went to at least 4 of them. At the end of one, somebody asked Jim Yunke when he would lead the next tour. And he says, no, not me. John Sharp will do the next one. So I have 6 now.
We'll just take maybe a last question or two here, John and panel. There's a question about when the Mennonites left. Where did they go, and was it all at once, or what was the progression? And I think there's different waves out at different times, right?
But in Akhmachet, 1935, they were all deported to Tajikistan, just north of the Afghan border. And they were dumped there and said, let's see if you can survive without exploiting the kulaks, or you are a kulak without exploiting the peasants. That was the charge of anybody who was wealthy. And so it was really hard. They hitched themselves to plows during the day. They built their lodges, their houses at night. About 1/4 of them died. 2 people who survived, I've interviewed. So I have that part of the story. And the next time I go back, I want to take extra time to go to that place, village number 7, it was called, just north of the Afghan border, to see what the local memories are.
Wow. John, do you want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the tour itself? I know there's some folks on the call that are interested in it. There's others that have been on the tour. Can you just talk a little bit about the tour?
Well, it's a tour like no other. It's the most exotic tour that I'm involved with. We spend 2 nights in Istanbul on the way, so we get that part of world history as well, with the famous Hagia Sophia and the other mosques that are there, that are world famous. And then we go to Tashkent. We spend a couple of days, and then we go to Samarkand. On the way, it's the Zeta Bulak, and then to Bukhara, and then finally to Khiva and Akhmachet. And all along the way, we hear stories, we eat food. It's just an exotic experience.
Thanks for that. There's a question, John, from Cheryl. Where did they go from north of Afghanistan?
Well, most did not survive. Gottlieb Quiring is one who survived to adulthood. He became a Baptist evangelist and minister, and was living near Hanover when I was there to interview him. He was, I think he said, about 13 during the deportation. So he had lots of memories, as did an older woman who was 16. And I checked with her about a story. I was staying with her family for a couple of nights while I was doing my research. And I said, by the way, there is this rumor that a Mennonite and an Uzbek got together, shacked up together. Is that true? The grandmother said, that was my great-grandfather.
Wow. John, is there anything more you'd want to add about the tour itself, or before we wrap up here?
Just that we learn more every time. This time, I want us to spend time with with Lado Fat, who introduced me to her archives and told the Khan's side of the story. And we usually have a meeting with at least one scholar who's researching the story, and maybe 2 or 3 this time. So there are new things that we will learn that you will experience on this next tour. So those of you who've been there might want to come again, because there'll be new things you'll learn. It's just a very good experience.
Well, we're nearing our end of our time here, folks, and there's been a lot of comments coming in now, and we'll try to answer them afterwards if we don't get to them all. But I just wanted to thank you, John, for leading this tour and the conversation and the panel tonight. Thank you to Karen, Harold, and Elizabeth for joining us and for your time and sharing your stories and your connection to this story. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you also to Sandra, who planned this evening tonight to get this group together. And there's many folks who are interested in the story. There's a lot of callers from all across North America, it looks like. And so we're thankful for you to take the time to join us this evening. If you'd like to learn more about the 2025 Silk Road Odyssey, the trek to Central Asia, there'll be a link in the chat. I saw it already posted there. And don't forget about the Tales of the Archives that Conrad was talking about as well, to hear more stories about that as well, and follow those podcasts. So thank you, panelists.
As we all are either Mennonites, love Mennonites, or want to learn more about them, we do know that they all love to have a deal. And so we want to also offer that to all of you who are watching this evening. For the Trek to Central Asia tour, for the month of March, there will be a discount code that is TCA, so Trek Central Asia 25. And so with $350 Canadian or $250 US dollars, we would love to take off your tour cost just as a thank you for joining us tonight. And you can feel free to share that with family and friends as well. We will also follow up with an email to you all with a recording of tonight. And if you have any questions going forward, office@tourimagination.com. We'd be happy to chat more with you.
That comes to the end of our time, folks. We can, John's willing to stay on the line a minute longer or a few minutes longer here. If there's those that are interested in the tour itself, you're welcome to stay on the line. We'll hang on a few minutes and answer any specific questions you have about the tour. But thank you to all for joining us. We wish you all a very blessed rest of the evening and a good rest of the week. Thank you for joining. Good night.
Good
Good night.
Thank you.
Before you all leave, I can't say enough about the tour. If you're thinking of it, do not hesitate. It's just a trip of a lifetime. My name's Joanne. I'm from Canada. I'm a great granddaughter of one of the trekkers, and
Yes.
I can't say enough. So please go on the trip. You will never forget it or
And I have
regret it.
this memory in my mind of you standing in the courtyard reading from your
Yes,
grandmother's journal. And we
yes.
were just all marveling at this
Yeah.
story that took
Because
place right there.
my feet were planted in the mud where the wagons landed in Tashkent. It still just thrills me to think about it.
Oh,
So thank you for this. Do not
Oh, yes.
hesitate.
Yeah.
It's an experience of a lifetime if you have connections and if you're interested.
thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, John,
Yeah.
too. Thank
You,
you.
Joanne.
Mhm.
Okay. Folks that have stayed on here, John or the group that has been on the tour, willing to take any questions you have specifically about the tour, please, you can take your phone off of mute and ask it, or you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, I see Donna Ince. I think I saw, who else did I see? Oh, Shirley Ratzlaff. Karen Senseney. Some of the Campen siblings are on.
You know a lot of people, John. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rick Yoder, goodness gracious.
Yeah.
It's you people who make tours memorable.
Mm.
Yeah, any of you want to speak up? Give a testimony about the tour, or
Actually,
we'll leave it at that?
we have another great granddaughter of a trekker joining us here tonight out of interest. That's Joyce Warman from Burbank, California. And she and I are first cousins. So it's our great grandma who trekked
Ah,
the distance at age 14 and wrote her marvelous journal. So
wow.
hi, Joyce.
Well, so maybe this
Hi,
fall,
Joanne.
Joyce will want to go.
It's Joanne came to our cabin in British Columbia and she was selling me on this. So it's just an amazing thing to think of our heritage. And I was just using that today about our great grandmother, how she's kind of my hero. And I was
Yeah.
talking to someone how her values have come through the generations. As we read her book, my parents read it in German, Henry and Amanda Rempel. My mom read it to us every summer.
Ah,
And then our one cousin translated it. And so this was a family book that we would carry on. But I was struck by the fact her values, God, family, and music, were the values and the threads, and how that has gone through the generations and literally impacted with her 11 children, and then on to our grandmother and on to our mothers. And so thank you, Joanne, for inviting me. But it still impacts us. So that's why I was so interested.
mhm. Indeed.
Thank you for sharing that, Joyce. Okay. Well, thank you everyone again. And feel free to send us any questions to our office at Tour Imagination email. Um, we would love to take your questions and help you out.